That's what professional boxing is about. Got to be clever, got to be smart, and not get hit.
It's what he does that makes him a hero, and what the other fellow doesn't do that makes him a cow. It's just as simple.
You could hit him, he can't hit you. That's what the science of boxing is all about.
Greetings everybody, I welcome you in our online international marathon which is dedicated to the memory of brilliant and outstanding coach Cus D'Amato. And today as our guest we have Antonio Graceffo. He was born in Italy and was a former professional boxer. Greetings Antonio, we are on air and we can start. Could you please tell about your approach to boxing? And what do you personally admire about Cus D'Amato?
So I started boxing when I was 12 years old, and in the 70s, that was the martial arts at the time. The kickboxing had just started, and what was happening was whenever they would have fights where they had boxers versus martial artists or kickboxers versus martial artists, basically the better boxer won. The people who had actual boxing training were beating all of the kickboxers at that time and martial artists at that time. So I learned very early to love boxing, and I'm from an Italian family, so I grew up with Rocky Marciano was one of my huge heroes growing up. The Rocky movies obviously had a huge influence on me. So I just grew up absolutely loving boxing and believing that boxing was the ultimate martial art, the best martial art, and I continued with that belief until the 1990s when MMA suddenly came and grappling became the dominant martial art. But for the first half of my life, boxing was the dominant martial art. So in the old days, let's say through the 1950s and 60s, upstate New York, Catskill, New York was kind of a big place for boxing. First of all, boxing, New York City was the boxing capital of the United States until Las Vegas began putting on the really big events. But Madison Square Garden, New York City, that was the place for boxing. There's a number of very famous gyms in New York City. And then up in Catskill, New York is where all of the, like Rocky Marciano, all those guys had their training camps who were in upstate New York. And so Cus D'Amato was sort of one of the last guys from that old era. He was quite old, obviously, when he died, when he was training Mike Tyson. But I always loved him because he took me back to that era. That because boxing in America has basically there's two golden ages of boxing. Because the Muhammad Ali era is also the golden age of boxing, but the one before that is sort of the one in the 50s, and Cus D'Amato belonged to that era, so that's what I always loved about him. And as a man, he was just a very, very old school, humble, simple, the old values, which I really respect and love about boxing.
So, Antonio, can you please tell what are the qualities that you admire about Cus?
So, one of the anomalies about Cus D'Amato that I love is that he never really boxed. He himself was never really a boxer, and I absolutely love that for so many reasons because without a doubt, I don't believe that being a champion or being a good fighter means you're a good coach. And consequently, there are people that, have never been champions. And in Cus's case, he never even boxed. And yet he was a great coach. And I love that. And I think that's something that people have forgotten and they've gotten away from. And I think that, MMA dominates the fight world today. And that's one of the only things I don't like about MMA. I often hear people say, I won't train with someone who I can beat. And I think, well, then you can't train with anybody who's 70 years old. Then you can't train with anybody that has these years and years and years of experience. And I think about people like Cus D'Amato. But there's others. There are a few other really great boxing coaches who never boxed. I don't know that Angelo Dundee had any significant boxing background. As a fighter. But anyway, I love that about Cus D'Amato. I love just the old, everything about him. It's the old school. He lived in a wooden house in upstate New York. They ate vegetables and meat, and they ran outdoors, and just it was just very simple. The old style of boxing.
Thank you. Antonio, how do you think, what stands behind this unique ability of Cus to choose a student, a simple guy, a delinquent, if we are speaking about Tyson, and nurturing him into a world champion?
Well, I think that Cus, look, I think Cus was great. I do believe Cus was great, but I also believe that when we have great results in life, it very often is because the right two people met at exactly the right time and the right circumstances. And I don't know that it's that Cus had a particular ability to choose champions. Tyson was in kind of a reformatory for young kids. There was a boxing coach there, one of the guards, one of the trainers, whatever, who was kind of a boxing coach, and he would teach the other boys to box. And suddenly Tyson, at age, I think 14 or 12 or something like this. First of all, he was like 200 pounds when he was like 12 or 13 or 14 years old.
Yeah.
And he was, knocking out the trainers. And so the trainer had been a student of Cus or had known Cus, and he called Cus and said, "Hey, look, I got this kid I want you to take a look at." So I think that there's a lot of sort of serendipity that goes into this. It's not that Cus looked at thousands of boys and he picked Tyson. Somebody called him and said, "I think you need to look at this kid." But Tyson was a physical phenomenon. Tyson was not normal. I mean, like I said, I believe he was a heavyweight when he was 14 already.
Mm-hmm.
I think, though, that what we would give Cus a lot of credit for is that Tyson hadn't even been to school. I mean, he'd been in and out of school. He'd been kicked out of school. So Tyson was not someone who could easily take advice or take lessons or listen to a teacher. And I think that Cus figured a way or found a way to communicate with Tyson. And I think that that's what made Tyson great. That's what made Cus great. That's what made the relationship great. I'm always remembered of, Angelo Dundee said that the reason he was so successful training Muhammad Ali was because he figured out how to communicate with Ali. And he said that he would never, if he wanted Ali to lift his back heel, he never said to Ali, "I want you to lift your back heel," because then Ali wouldn't do it. So he would say to Ali, "Oh, I was watching you box and you're lifting your back heel very nicely." And then whenever he complimented, Ali would do that more. And that's how he'd get him to do it. And he said that, like if you ever gave Ali advice or told him that, he just wouldn't listen. And I'm sure, I would have to believe Tyson was the same way. I'm sure Tyson was not the kind of person that took advice very well. So I think that was the thing. And I think, too, that Cus was, obviously Tyson needed a father figure. Cus probably filled that role. And I think Cus being so old when he was training Tyson, there was probably, there was no competition between them. I don't think Tyson, if the trainer had been 40 years old or 35 years old and it all fit, maybe Tyson would have felt like he had to compete with that trainer, or he had to outdo him, or he had to beat him. But, when you have an old man coming in and training, you don't feel the need to knock him out or to show him up. And I think that may have worked. Because Cus was so old, he wasn't threatening to Tyson, and then it was easier for them to have that relationship.
How do you think, where from did Cus know how to create world champions?
Well, I think that Cus didn't come from as bad of a background on these fight, but he understood the streets. I mean, Cus understood the streets. He understood being from an immigrant family. He understood not being rich, not having everything. So I think he was definitely able to relate to Tyson on that sort of level. Plus, again, Cus finds him at the end of Cus's, literally the very end of Cus's career, because he dies while Mike is a contender, right? Before Mike won the championship.
Yes.
So that means he had a lifetime of experience. It was a long lifetime, a lot of experience. He'd had a lot of fighters, and he took that lifetime of experience, and it helped him to. It basically culminated with this one fighter.
Thank you, Antonio. So when we are speaking about Cus, so we see three exact consequent results, 3 world champions, right? Jose Torres, Patron, and Tyson. So, do you think this can be called a coincidence? Or is it the result of thorough, logical, intellectual work?
No, I don't think it's coincidence at all. I mean, obviously great trainers have great fighters. I mean, Angelo Dundee had multiple, world championships as well. What's his name? Delagrati and who's the one that's so famous? The one that works with Manny Pacquiao. What's his name? But these guys have, most of them wind up having multiple championships by the end, and it's just because they've honed their skills to that point. They're able to deal, they know how to deal with different kinds of fighters. I mean, look at Jose Torres, and Jose Torres is a very different human being than Mike Tyson. That's just a different kind of fighter. That's the part that always amazes me, is that these great trainers, Cus D'Amato, Angelo Dundee, whatever, they not only have multiple championships, but they're in different weight categories. That amazes me. You have a Mike Tyson in the heavyweight division. He is just powerful, and then you got a Jose Torres. That's I'm not sure what his weight division was, but he's much smaller, and that's amazing to me that they're able to coach multiple guys in multiple weight categories and very different. I mean, the first major book about Tyson, I believe it's called like Fire and Blood, and Jose Torres is the author. So this is a guy who's smart enough to write books, and he writes articles and things like that. It's a very different character than most of the boxers that Cus probably dealt with, which meant Cus probably had to find a way to communicate with Jose Torres, and he had to find a way to communicate with Mike Tyson. So no, I don't think it's luck or coincidence. I think it's skill.
Antonio, when we're speaking about the offspring, if I can say so, of Cus D'Amato, the Peekaboo style, like Tom Paddy, his student, and other people that knew Cus, they consider the style to be even mystical, enigmatic style. So what do you think about Peekaboo's origins?
Well, yeah, okay, so the Peekaboo is interesting because it's actually an old style, and then, it's one of those styles that, let's say it's a classic style, and then it periodically dies for like 10, 20 years, nobody does it, and then suddenly somebody comes along and does it. So Archie Moore used the Peekaboo style. And in Ali's second career, we could say that he was using something similar to the Peekaboo style. Second career, meaning after he made his comeback after he'd had his license pulled. So the Peekaboo style, it goes in and out of fashion. I think it depends a lot on, obviously, the trainer that wants to teach it, and then it has to be right for that particular fighter. So for Tyson, one of the weird anomalies about Tyson is that Tyson had asthma, and he couldn't move. He was incapable of moving the way that Ali did, in his first career. And of course, Ali is unusual in how he moved. There's never been a heavyweight that moved like that. But just the point being, Tyson couldn't even move as much as most heavyweights, and he knew that. And he said, I had to finish my fights quickly because I had asthma and I would get out of breath. I mean, that's madness to go all the way to the World Championship saying, I have to get my fights out of the way because I'll get out of breath. And so the Peekaboo style works really well for a man that has that limitation of movement, right? And then Tyson was phenomenally strong, just so powerful, and especially with the short punches, close-in punches, which again, when you use Peekaboo, the advantage is that you're going to take less hits. The disadvantage is you're going to lose range, you're going to lose distance, and you're probably going to lose speed. And so it definitely suits a more powerful fighter. Because think about this, if Tyson were not so powerful and he were trying to win on points, he would probably never get off enough punches to be able to win on points coming out of that Peekaboo stance. So what's interesting for me is that in MMA, because now I just fight MMA. I mean, I haven't had a boxing fight I had one maybe 5 years ago, but I haven't had like real professional boxing fight in like 20 years. No, not that many, maybe 15. But so I just fight MMA now. But for MMA, we use it's called center shield, but it's very similar idea that it's absolute defense, but then it slows down your offense and it reduces your range. And so we see in MMA almost a rebirth of the Peekaboo again. But Archie Moore was famous for that. And when Ali was in his first career, they tried to bring Archie Moore in as a trainer for Ali, and they absolutely hated each other and they didn't get along. And one of the things was probably stylistically they just didn't work, because Archie Moore was Peekaboo style and Ali in his first career was not. So I think the Peekaboo style worked for Tyson. So again, why did Tyson become a champion? Why was Cus D'Amato able to make a champion? And they met on the right day at the right time. And if Tyson had met any other trainer, they would have said to him, "Oh, we want you to use movement and length and distance and throw more shots per minute and all that," which Tyson couldn't have done, and he probably would have wound up being a contender. Mm-hmm. Whereas because he had Cus D'Amato telling him use the Peekaboo style, and that suited him perfectly, and so that's how he became a champion.
As you know, Cus was in litigation he was suing with IBS, International Boxing Club, for 11 years. So how do you think one man, Cus D'Amato, could have resisted whole boxing association?
Well, if you read Fire and Blood, I believe that's the name of the book, right? The Jose Torres book. But if you read his book and a few of the others, you find out, Cus had close friends. He had been in the game a long time. A lot of people knew him. A lot of people liked him. He had some other champions. He had some other near champions. Some of his students had gone on to, maybe they left boxing and they had professional jobs or whatever. So he definitely had people in his life who helped him with various things. And so when he was in his legal battles and things like that, he had good people around him that gave him advice. And I think that if you compare Cus D'Amato to Don King, right? Probably you've never heard anybody say those two names in the same sentence.
No, never.
When you compare them, you look at someone like Don King, he has millions and tens of millions of dollars, but I don't think there's anyone on this earth that actually likes him. So he would hire all the best lawyers, and that sort of thing, whereas Cus, it would be kind of a do it yourself, build your legal team in your living room. They probably met in his living room or in his kitchen, and he probably had dinner with the fighters in his kitchen, the kids that were living with him and that. And he just pieced it together. But it was a labor of love. It was people who loved him and supported him and liked him, and they helped him through these legal struggles.
Maybe you know some facts which were not publicly discussed but did happen in the environment of boxing.
Well, something I would really like to say, it's really important to me to say this. Everybody talks about how powerful Mike Tyson was, and he could knock down a building with each hand, and that's absolutely true, and I'm not going to take away from that. However, the media portrayed him as this brute, and he's just strong, and he knocks people down. If you watch Mike Tyson fight, during the Cus D'Amato era, when Cus was training him, Mike Tyson was one of the most technically correct boxers probably in the history of boxing, and he will never get the recognition for that. Mike Tyson was so perfect in his technique, and this is why he was knocking people out. Because I don't care how strong you are, you have to throw your punches perfectly to get the knockout. You don't get it on strength alone. One of the few fighters in history that maybe you could say did it just on strength was the first Italian American champion. He had absolutely no boxing training at all, but he was like 6'8" and 300 pounds or some ridiculous size, and he knocked out a lot of guys. But for the most part, you only knock people out if you're doing it right. And if you watch Tyson, he was technically perfect, which again is something I like about Cus D'Amato and why I like that old era of boxers, because they absolutely believe fundamentals. And so that's something I think is so important that we need to, in any discussion of Cus or Tyson, please, we always need to remember this guy was technically perfect. And then when we go from the Cus D'Amato era to the Don King era of Mike Tyson's career, stops training at that level. He stops having the fundamentals. He doesn't have anybody looking after his fundamentals anymore. They're feeding the media. They're feeding Mike Tyson's head. You're so powerful. You're not good at building down with either hand. And then what does he do? He loses his technical edge, and then he loses his title.
After the death of Cus, like everything went so wrong in Mike's life, like everything.
Yeah. And without a doubt, I mean, there's a lot going on there, and a lot of it is psychological, and a lot of it he's probably partying. But even that, like the old school, right? Cus, I'm sure, even when Mike was making, well, first of all, we know when Mike was making money but living with Cus, he lived with Cus. He came home every night and he slept there. And I know he would go to New York City and see his family and probably his friends, and he probably was drinking and using drugs and whatever when he was in New York City, but he was living upstate New York with Cus most of the time, and especially when he was training. So he was living old school. He was, probably going to bed at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or whatever. And I'm sure that once he was living with Don King, or under Don King's, rule, that wasn't happening anymore. I'm sure that he was out. He was doing whatever he wanted, out every night, And so that's something else I like about the old school guys, I always talk about how much I love Rocky Marciano. Same thing, Rocky Marciano, in bed, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock every night. Also trained 12 months out of the year, instead of taking off in between fights. So when Tyson was living with Cus, I would assume he was training. I'm fairly certain he was training constantly. Whereas when he was living on his own later under Don King, I'm sure that between fights he was taking off from training.
Antonio, so now coming to a very, mystical part, let's say. So there are a lot of people telling that there were exact cases that actually demonstrated that Cus possessed some, if you wish, superhuman abilities, something not normal, not for average people. So what do you think? I mean, what is it?
Well, I think any good coach, so you can be a good coach, right? You can be a good coach and someone else could be a good student, but you're not perfectly in tune. So what happens is you go through life, you have different coaches, and then eventually, hopefully you find that one that you're in tune with and you're perfect with. And like my coach, my MMA coach, when I'm in the corner, whenever I was in the corner in between rounds, we didn't even talk. We didn't even talk to each other. And then as the bell rang and I would go back out to fight, he would say to me, okay, keep with the plan. And there was no plan, but we were so in tune mentally that I knew what he wanted me to do and I was doing it. And he knew what he wanted me to do and I was doing it. We didn't need to say anything. And he was never this coach that shouted instructions to me. It was like this telepathic bond. And I would have to believe that Tyson and Cus had that, and probably even more, on some other level. But Ali, for example, a lot of people don't know his younger brother was a very gifted boxer as well, and also a professional heavyweight, and probably could have been a contender if the older brother hadn't become so famous, and then they just dedicated all their resources to Ali. But they said that when his younger brother was fighting, Ali was sitting in the stadium, and he was mouthing the commands. Jab, jab, left hook, duck, whatever. He was mouthing that. He wasn't shouting it. He was mouthing it, and his brother was doing exactly what he was saying.
Wow, I haven't heard about this story.
Yeah, and even I've heard of cases where the coach, like for example, Cus D'Amato was ill and couldn't go, like when Tyson fought in the Junior Olympics, and Cus D'Amato couldn't be there.
Yes.
And people that were in the room with him said that he was calling the duck, left, right, whatever the combinations were, and Tyson was literally doing that on the other side of the planet. So I think this is just something that happens between. It's not just a good coach and a good student, it's the perfect one. It's sort of like when you get married and it's like the perfect soulmate and you wind up staying married forever. It's like that.
Thank you very much, Antonio. It was a pleasure to speak with you about greatest Cus D'Amato.
That's what professional boxing is about. You gotta be clever, you gotta be smart, and not get hit.
It's what he does that makes him a hero, and what the other fellow doesn't do that makes him a cow. It's just as simple.
You could hit him, he can't hit you. That's what the science of boxing is all about.